there's a lot of damage being done.
They're using Australia as a cash cow. They are grifters. That is why they're here.
The 4 days that Harry and Meghan are there, that it will cost hundreds of thousands of dollars in taxpayer-funded security, and that's unacceptable.
There was a moment that, at the time, barely registered outside royal circles. It didn't happen on a stage, it wasn't caught cleanly on camera, and it wasn't part of any official speech. But years later, that moment has taken on a life of its own.
She reportedly said, "I cannot believe I'm not getting paid for this."
Because of what it supposedly revealed about everything that followed. During their first major royal tour in Australia in 2018, an allegation surfaced that Meghan Markle privately remarked, "I can't believe I'm not getting paid for this." Whether that exact wording is accurate or not, the story stuck. And more importantly, it became symbolic.
And little wonder why Harry and Meghan chose now for their latest cosplaying sham royal tour.
Because if that mindset was real, then the entire narrative around that tour, and everything that came after, starts to look very different. At the time, none of this seemed to matter. Meghan and Prince Harry arrived in Australia as the monarchy's brightest new figures. They were newly married, globally adored, and seen as a modernizing force within the royal family.
When they say it's privately funded, what they're not taking on board is the fact that if police are going to have to come to wherever they visit, that's an expense to the Australian taxpayer.
Crowds lined the streets in huge numbers. The media coverage was overwhelmingly positive. When they announced Meghan's pregnancy during the tour, it elevated the entire trip into something historic. It felt like a new era had begun. But beneath that surface, cracks were already forming. Reports of tension behind the scenes began to circulate. Staff difficulties, personality clashes, growing frustration with royal protocol. None of it was front-page news yet, but the tone was shifting. What had initially looked like a seamless integration into royal life was, according to insiders, becoming increasingly strained.
First of all, you can't unroyal Harry, even if you brouhaha.
It just unrolled Andrew.
2 seconds. Yeah, that was it. By the way, Piers, that was really uncomfortable when you were sitting there, Neanderthal style, placing Harry in the same bracket as Andrew.
What?
That is why that alleged comment matters so much now. Because it suggests that, from very early on, there may have been a fundamental mismatch between expectation and reality. Royal life is structured around duty, hierarchy, and public service. It is not a commercial enterprise. There are no appearance fees, no personal brand deals attached to official engagements. Everything is tied to the institution.
Now, the couple, their team claimed the trip is being funded privately. And what was it that they said?
46,000 people have signed this petition. There are 25 million people in Australia.
Oh, yeah.
That means that 24,995,000 haven't signed this petition, which is a ridiculous thing to say.
If someone enters that system expecting autonomy, control, or financial reward, the friction is inevitable. Fast forward to the present, and Australia has once again become a focal point, but under completely different circumstances. This time, Meghan and Harry are no longer working members of the royal family. They stepped away, citing a desire for independence, privacy, and freedom from the constraints of royal life.
I have heard from people who have tried to sign up to Meghan's girls' retreat, and you're made to fill out a form in which you must disclose your age. I had one woman write to me and say, I had to put my age in. My age is 63. I knew that minute I would be declined. There are still tickets available. They can't sell out this. It's a 300-person venue. She can't sell out 300 seats.
That decision, formalized after the Sandringham summit, was supposed to draw a clear line. They would build a new life, separate from the institution they left behind. And yet, what is unfolding now looks strangely familiar. Their current visit to Australia features many of the same elements as an official royal tour. Public appearances, charity visits, carefully managed media moments, all of it mirrors the structure of the tours they once conducted as working royals. The visuals are almost identical. The tone, however, is not. Because now the question isn't about representation, it's about intention.
The visit to the Children's Hospital, highly publicized. That's Meghan ripping something right out of Diana's playbook. Serving homeless women the other day, wearing Diana's $26,000 Cartier watch, wearing a Christian Dior tailored suit.
Critics argue that what Meghan and Harry are doing is effectively recreating the royal model outside the monarchy. a parallel version of the same system, but without the constraints that come with it. They are no longer bound by palace rules, but they still benefit from the recognition those rules once gave them. This is where the language becomes harsh. Terms like grifters and cashing in have started to dominate certain discussions.
This is a business trip, and Harry and Meghan added some of these little charity moments so that people would not skewer them over the business element of the Australia trip, the 3-day retreat, Harry getting paid to speak at a mental health conference. If that was all that they were doing, then the commentators like us would be like, you can't pretend to be royals.
The accusation is not simply that they are working independently, but that they are leveraging royal imagery and status for personal gain. The idea of a shadow monarchy has emerged. Not an official institution, but something that looks close enough to raise questions. Supporters, of course, see it differently. From their perspective, Meghan and Harry are simply using their platform to continue philanthropic work while also building sustainable careers. They argue that stepping away from the royal family does not erase who they are or the global interest in them. If anything, it gives them more freedom to operate.
The funniest part about this, Piers, they say that they're just coming here as two private citizens. Well, in the last couple of hours, Meghan has been announced, would you believe, as a guest judge on the Australian version of MasterChef.
But the tension lies in how those two realities overlap, because the optics are difficult to ignore. When you see them visiting hospitals, engaging with communities, and conducting what appears to be structured public outreach, it is hard not to compare it directly to their previous roles. The line between private individuals and public figures becomes blurred, and that blur is exactly what fuels the controversy. It also comes at a particularly sensitive time for the monarchy itself.
They were pregnant with Archie, so we felt honoured until we found out that Meghan actually hated the trip. Apparently she hated every second. She said, "I can't believe that I'm not being paid for this." She had her sourpuss face on the entire time.
With King Charles III now leading the institution following the passing of Queen Elizabeth II, the royal family is navigating a period of transition and increased scrutiny. Questions about relevance, public support, and long-term stability are already in the air. Against that backdrop, the existence of a high-profile alternative narrative, represented by Meghan and Harry, complicates things further, because it creates comparison. Not officially, not explicitly, but inevitably.
She said, "Call me Meg." She didn't even demand to be introduced as Duchess.
Great.
And still,
Let's
you have
call
a go
her
at the
Meg.
titles.
Let's quit the Duchess bullshit.
Okay, well, that's
Right?
what she wants. Hi, Meg.
Meghan, Duchess of Sussex. No, I'm from Sussex. Piss off.
On one side, you have the traditional structure of the monarchy, built on continuity and protocol. On the other, you have a modern, media-driven approach that operates with fewer restrictions. Both are visible, both attract attention, and both shape public perception. Australia, in this context, becomes more than just a location. It becomes a symbol of contrast. The same country that once welcomed them as royal representatives is now witnessing a different version of their story.
Harry and Andrew in two very different categories, and I don't think you can put them in here. But there's one common thing that they both do, and that is damage the monarchy.
Right.
And that is what we're seeing, I think,
That's my point.
and I think that's what we're seeing in this tour.
The excitement is still there in some places, but it is more divided. Some people are still eager to see them, to engage, to participate in the moment. Others are more skeptical, questioning the purpose and the cost. That division is important because it shows that the narrative has shifted. This is no longer a universally celebrated royal tour. It is a contested event, interpreted in very different ways depending on perspective. And that is what makes it so significant. What started as a single tour in 2018 has evolved into a much larger question about identity, purpose, and power. Are Meghan and Harry redefining what it means to be public figures after leaving the monarchy?
And now that they're doing some of these little pop-up charity PR opportunities, because they're certainly not royal engagements, it's harder to criticize them because the photographs that will be shown as we're criticizing them are them with small children that are ill.
Or are they still operating within the same framework they claim to step away from? The answer depends on who you ask. But one thing is clear, that original moment, that alleged comment, and that first Australian tour are no longer just part of their past. They have become the starting point of a story that is still unfolding. If the first Australian tour was the beginning of the fracture, then what we are seeing now looks much closer to a full-scale transformation. Because this is no longer just about whether Meghan Markle and Prince Harry fit into royal life.
How are Harry and Meghan representing this country right now? Okay, we are in the middle of a cost of living crisis and a fuel crisis here right now, and we are supposed to fork out money for these two on a quasi-royal tour when they are no longer working royals.
It's about whether they are building something that competes with it. And that is where the situation becomes far more serious. Over the past few years, their strategy has followed a very clear pattern. Step 1, step away from the royal family. Step 2, tell their story on their own terms. Step 3, convert global attention into influence, deals, and visibility. At first, that seemed like a straightforward transition from monarchy to media.
The Children's Hospital, they were greeted by the crowds, but this is certainly not the hundreds of thousands that lined the streets back in 2018 for their last visit.
But the problem is, it didn't stay in that lane. Instead of fully detaching from the royal framework, they kept circling back to it. Interviews referencing royal life, projects built around their experiences, public appearances that mirror the tone and structure of official engagements. The result is something that doesn't feel entirely independent, but also doesn't belong to the institution anymore. That in-between space is where the controversy lives, because from the outside, it increasingly looks like a rival system, not in a formal sense. There is no competing palace, no official titles being granted, no constitutional role.
And what is this tour? I don't understand what it is, because I've done many of these royal tours, and apart from, I was saying to Joe in the makeup room, apart from unveiling a plaque or planting a tree, this looks like a royal tour. And yet, at the weekend, they are going to be coining it in, and that's where I have a massive problem with this.
But in terms of visibility, narrative, and global reach, the comparison is unavoidable. When they travel, cameras follow. When they speak, headlines form. When they appear in public, the imagery resembles the very thing they left behind. And this latest Australia visit amplifies that effect. The structure is almost too familiar. Carefully timed appearances, visits to charitable organizations, engagement with local communities, media coverage that frames the trip as significant, even if it is not officially sanctioned.
We're two people who have caused intense damage to the reputation of the royal family and the institution of the monarchy are now running a kind of renegade rival royal family, engaging in rival tours and going to places like Australia, and that can only be ultimately more damaging for the actual royal family.
It creates the impression of a royal tour without the monarchy. That contradiction is what critics are focusing on, because the original departure from royal life was framed around freedom. Freedom from scrutiny, from hierarchy, from expectation. The idea was to build something new, something separate. But what is unfolding now doesn't look entirely new. It looks like a modified version of the same model, adjusted to allow for personal control and financial opportunity.
Meghan and Harry disrespected us. So no, the fanfare isn't there like it was 8 years ago. Sure, the crowds are going to come out when they're doing their walkabouts here and there. But no, this is not 2018. It's a very different tour.
And that is where the accusations escalate. Some commentators argued that this is not just about independence, but about monetization. That the structure of these visits, the visibility, the branding, the partnerships, is designed to convert public interest into revenue streams. Not necessarily in obvious ways like ticket sales alone, but through long-term positioning. Every appearance reinforces relevance.
What has been discovered recently is Australians are pretty upset that at least 2 police forces confirmed that they will provide taxpayer-funded security to Harry and Meghan.
Every headline sustains attention, and attention in today's media environment is currency. This is where the term cash cow starts appearing in discussions. Australia, in this narrative, is not just a destination, it is a market, a place where recognition is high, where past connections exist, and where media coverage can be leveraged. The argument is that by returning to a location that once celebrated them as royals, Meghan and Harry can reactivate that same level of interest, but this time on their own terms. Whether that interpretation is fair or not is debatable, but the perception alone is powerful.
With rumours that William and Catherine's next trip might well be to Australia,
Right.
doesn't this just take the gloss off?
Because it feeds into a broader storyline that has been building for years. The idea that they are no longer simply former royals, but operators in a global brand ecosystem. And in that ecosystem, everything, from appearances to partnerships, contributes to a larger narrative of influence. This is also where their relationship with major platforms becomes relevant.
We're watching these two do exactly what they said they didn't want to do. This is why they left the royal family.
Early on, deals with companies like Netflix and Spotify were seen as validation of their post-royal strategy. These were not small projects. They were major, high-value agreements that positioned them as serious players in the media space. But as time went on, the results became more complicated. Projects faced delays. Expectations were not always met. Public reception was mixed. And in some cases, partnerships ended or shifted direction.
I don't think Harry regrets this at all, because today he went to a fatherhood function. It was a Q&A function, right? And he said, quote, he had to cleanse himself from his past. He then went on to say that he couldn't connect with Meghan while she was pregnant with Archie. And then he went on to talk about his ongoing therapy sessions.
That created a new narrative, one that questioned not just their intentions, but their execution. Are they effective in this new space? Are they delivering on the opportunities they've been given? Or are they relying too heavily on the attention generated by their past? Those questions have not gone away, and they resurface every time a new appearance or project emerges. The Australia visit, in this context, becomes part of that evaluation. It is not just about what they are doing, but about how it fits into the larger trajectory.
I think you all protest a little too much, and I can smell the rat. The problem with now complaining about grifter Meghan and Harry and, oh, look, they're just a cash cow, they're milking Australia. Like, no one's forcing Australia to buy tickets to Meghan's retreat. No one's forcing Australians to go and welcome them on their walkabout.
No, but any member of the royal family could go and do that.
Yeah,
They
right.
could all do it.
Is this a strategic move to rebuild momentum? A way to reconnect with audiences that once supported them? Or simply another chapter in an ongoing attempt to define their identity outside the monarchy? The answer is not straightforward, because there are conflicting signals. On one hand, there is clear effort being made to present the visit as meaningful and impactful.
The way Australians are feeling about this couple, where they go, they will be booed.
Engagements with charities, interactions with the public, and messaging around social issues all suggest a desire to maintain a sense of purpose. On the other hand, the commercial elements, branding, visibility, and potential monetization remain impossible to ignore. That duality creates tension. It also creates vulnerability, because the more closely their actions resemble traditional royal behavior, the more scrutiny they face.
They are now back there. This is what I truly love. They're there because they can't get work anywhere else. Netflix has dumped them. Spotify and Lemonada have dumped Meghan. The coffers have dried up.
Not just from critics, but from observers who are trying to understand where the line is. At what point does independent activity start to look like imitation? And at what point does imitation become competition? This is where the monarchy itself enters the equation more directly. Figures like Prince William and Catherine, Princess of Wales, represent the future of the institution. Their role is to maintain continuity, to preserve the structure, and to ensure that the monarchy remains relevant in a changing world.
We're talking about constructs that carry British titles that we're all looking at from afar and making judgments. Harry and Meghan overtly sat there and criticised in that moment, in a painful moment, the royal family.
Oh, they didn't criticise them, they absolutely trashed them.
That task is already complex. The existence of a high-profile alternative narrative makes it even more complicated. Because it divides attention, it introduces comparison, and it raises the possibility that the royal brand is no longer singular. This is not just a theoretical issue. Public perception matters. Media framing matters. If audiences begin to see multiple versions of what royal looks like.
The pictures with the sick kids in hospital and cooking the food for homeless people in refuge centres and all that, that's a cover-up. You know, the real business of the trip is business.
The clarity of the institution's identity can weaken. And in a system that relies heavily on symbolism and tradition, that clarity is crucial. That is why some voices within royal commentary circles are calling for more decisive action. Not necessarily in terms of direct confrontation, but in terms of definition, drawing clearer boundaries, reinforcing what the monarchy represents and what it does not, ensuring that there is no ambiguity about roles, responsibilities, and legitimacy. Because ambiguity is where narratives collide.
It wasn't Meghan giving to these homeless women. What we saw, at least in my algorithm, was a homeless woman off cam, because we cannot have the dispossessed next to one Meghan Markle befouling her frame, saying to Meghan, oh, you look like a supermodel. You're so beautiful. You know, it's all about the servicing of this ego that is boundless, it will never, ever be filled.
And right now, that collision is happening in real time. The Australia visit is not an isolated event. It is part of a larger pattern that is still evolving. Each appearance, each headline, each reaction adds another layer to the story. And with every layer, the stakes become higher. What began as a departure has turned into a reconfiguration. And the question is no longer whether Meghan and Harry are outside the royal system. It is whether they are building something that stands alongside it. Something that looks similar. Something that feels familiar.
I am Australian,
there are
and I
various
have a
fault
lot of
lines.
boots on the ground there, and it is going down like a cup of cold sick in most in most territories. I've had even my father, who's got no interest in the royals, sort of like texting me and saying, "You can have it from me. Nobody wants to pay tax for their security."
But operates by entirely different rules. And if that is the case, then the real conflict is only just beginning. What makes this moment different from everything that came before is not just what Meghan Markle and Prince Harry are doing, it's the timing. Because this is happening at a point when the monarchy itself is under more pressure than it has faced in decades. And the transition from Queen Elizabeth II to King Charles III was never going to be simple. Elizabeth represented continuity, stability, and a level of global recognition that is almost impossible to replicate.
But don't you think, Tessa, they've kind of unroyaled themselves? I feel like they are sort of like just not much better now than crap celebrities.
Her presence alone sustained the institution through crises, scandals, and generational change. Without her, everything becomes more exposed. And right now, that exposure is undeniable. Charles is not just leading a monarchy, he is defending it. Questions about relevance are louder than ever. Younger generations are less emotionally attached to the institution. In countries like Australia, conversations about becoming a republic have not disappeared. They have simply been waiting for the right moment to resurface. Moments like this create that opportunity.
Meghan's now got something going on with selling clothes or celebrity lookalike clothes or something that she wore the other day to me. And I'm assuming this is money that's going back into their pockets, not into charity, which is what the king, just for anyone says, the king, of course, sometimes gets money for different things, but that goes straight back in to his charities.
Because when the monarchy appears divided, uncertain, or challenged from within, it weakens the sense of unity that has historically been its greatest strength. And that is exactly what the situation with Harry and Meghan represents. Not an external attack, but an internal fracture playing out on a global stage. At the center of that fracture is a very personal conflict. On one side, there is Charles, a father, a king, and someone known for his instinct to reconcile rather than confront.
What I would say is Mr. and Mrs. Grifter peers have come to Australia and are using us as a cash cow, essentially.
On the other side, there is his younger son, who has repeatedly spoken about feeling trapped, unheard, and disconnected from the institution he was born into. That tension is not theoretical. It is deeply human, and that is what makes it so difficult to resolve. Because every decision carries two consequences. If Charles moves toward reconciliation, he risks reopening a cycle where private conversations become public narratives. Trust, once broken at that level, is not easily restored.
If I was William and Catherine watching this tour, I mean, I'd be furious because I would think, how can you? This was the whole point of the Sandringham Summit. You can't have your cake and eat it. It's one or the other.
Well, as the Queen famously said, you're either
You're in or you're out.
or you're out.
There is a constant fear that any attempt to repair the relationship could lead to further exposure, more interviews, more revelations. But if he does nothing, if he allows the distance to remain, the divide becomes permanent. And permanence is dangerous, not just for the family, but for the institution, because it signals that even at the highest level, unity cannot be maintained. That the monarchy, which presents itself as a symbol of continuity, cannot resolve its own internal conflicts. This is where Prince William becomes a crucial figure.
The titles need to be stripped. It needs to happen. And I from everything I'm told, William is all for just cutting the cord, cutting them out. And it's Charles who is the soft touch, who is very, very reluctant to do so.
Unlike his father, William is widely seen as more decisive, more protective of the institution, and less willing to tolerate ambiguity. Reports consistently suggest that his position on Harry is far more rigid. From his perspective, the issue is not just personal, it is structural. The monarchy cannot function effectively if its boundaries are constantly being tested. That difference in approach creates a quiet but significant divide within the royal leadership itself.
Meghan and Harry using every opportunity for a photo opportunity here, a PR op here. I mean, they love a microphone and they love a camera, don't they?
Charles represents patience. William represents control. And the balance between those two approaches will shape what happens next. Meanwhile, the public is watching all of this unfold in real time, not through official statements, but through fragments. Interviews, appearances, commentary, speculation. Each piece adds to the overall picture. And in that picture, the monarchy does not look untouchable, it looks vulnerable. That vulnerability is amplified by comparison. Because while the institution is dealing with internal tension, Meghan and Harry are operating in a space that appears more flexible, more modern, and more responsive to media dynamics.
Harry talking about how his father and his brother were trapped in this institution and now he was free. And I'm looking at this Not a Royal Tour and thinking, this is exactly what you said you didn't want to be a part of.
They can speak directly, they can adapt quickly, and they can shape their narrative without the constraints of protocol. That contrast matters. It creates the impression that there are two different models of public life competing for attention. One rooted in tradition, the other in adaptability. One defined by rules, the other by autonomy.
The other side of this is I have seen scenes of, a lot of people pleased to see them turning up, happy to be with them, wanting pictures and so on and so on. So they're clearly not hated by everybody in Australia.
For audiences, especially younger ones, that distinction can influence perception in ways that are difficult to control. If the monarchy appears rigid while its former members appear dynamic, the balance of interest can shift. Not necessarily in terms of loyalty, but in terms of engagement. And engagement, in the modern era, is what sustains relevance. This is why the next phase for the royal family is so critical. There are already indications that future tours, particularly those involving William and Catherine, Princess of Wales, will carry additional weight.
If they want to go and make a ton of money, out of being Harry and Meghan, fine. But to do it under the guise of titles bestowed by the royal family and monarchy, which they have spent years trashing, I think is unacceptable.
They are not just diplomatic visits. They are opportunities to reaffirm what the monarchy represents, to reconnect with audiences, and to demonstrate that the institution can evolve without losing its core identity. But even those efforts will exist within the shadow of what has already happened. Because the narrative is no longer simple. It is no longer just about tradition versus modernity. It is about trust, consistency, and perception. Every move is analyzed, every appearance is compared, and every decision is interpreted through the lens of an ongoing story that has no clear resolution. And that brings everything back to the central question. What happens next?
Apparently, she's going to be providing mentorship and guidance. Now, I don't know about you, but what sort of mentorship and guidance can she possibly be providing? Will she be showing them how she makes her jam or her dog treat?
There are only a few possible directions. One is reconciliation, a gradual, carefully managed attempt to rebuild relationships and reduce public tension. This would require concessions on both sides, a level of discretion that has not always been present, and a willingness to prioritize long-term stability over short-term narrative control. Another is separation, a clear, definitive boundary that removes ambiguity. No overlap, no shared space, no confusion about roles. This would simplify the structure of the monarchy, but would also formalize the divide in a way that cannot easily be reversed.
They are not wanted. There is a petition that is up to at least 45,000 signatures demanding that the Australian government spend not one iota of their tax money protecting these two.
The third option is continuation, maintaining the current situation where both sides operate independently but remain connected through history, identity, and ongoing public interest. This is the most unstable option because it allows the conflict to persist without resolution. At the moment, that is exactly where things stand. Unresolved. And that uncertainty is what makes this moment so significant, because it is not just about one tour, one interview, or one set of accusations. It is about the long-term trajectory of an institution that has defined itself through continuity for centuries, now facing a challenge that cannot be addressed through tradition alone. The monarchy has survived wars, political upheaval, and cultural transformation. But those challenges were external. This one is different. It is internal, visible, and constantly evolving. And as long as that remains the case, every appearance, every decision, and every moment, whether in Australia or anywhere else, becomes part of a much larger story.
Meghan invited herself to a private party hosted by Netflix, attended by Ted Sarandos, head of Netflix, and his wife.
A story that is no longer just about royalty, but about what happens when legacy, identity, and modern influence collide in full view of the world. If you made it this far, I want to hear your take on all of this. Do you think Meghan and Harry went too far with this Australia trip, or is this just them building something new outside the system? Drop your thoughts in the comments. I read everything, and a lot of the next videos are based on what you guys are saying. If you enjoyed this breakdown, hit like so more people actually see it, and share it with someone who's been following this whole royal drama. And don't forget to subscribe to Crown Clash. I'm uploading new videos every single day, covering everything as it happens. Also, if you want more on this topic, check the channel. There are already multiple videos on the Australia situation, breaking down all the main events, moments, and drama step by step. Thanks for watching. See you in next one.